Hello and welcome to our broadcast. I'm your host, Brett Barrow, founder and CEO of HerFeed. As a reminder, the information provided during this event is for informational purposes only. For medical questions, please reach out to your primary care or healthcare professional. This live broadcast will cover sensitive, real-life subject matter and could be difficult for some to hear. For anyone struggling with domestic violence issues, help numbers will be provided. And the reason why I am hosting this today is because it's actually 5 years ago that I left an abusive relationship myself that entailed a lot of emotional abuse, domestic violence. And, my hope is that if we can give anybody that's in a situation like that some reassurance that there is a light at the end of the tunnel and some hope that better days are coming, because I know how scary it is to leave. I know what a number it does on your mental health. I know how, you feel like this is a situation you're scared to leave. You don't know what's coming next in your life. And I know from experience that, better days are coming and that everybody deserves to be in a relationship that makes them feel safe, makes them feel loved, makes them feel worthy, makes them feel like they are, with a partner that protects them and not that they have to run from or hide from or be scared to be around. So I'm very honored to be able to be doing this live, especially with you two amazing women. So let me introduce our guest today. Dr. Paula Newman-Skomsky, nurse practitioner and forensic nurse examiner with Providence Intervention Center for Assault and Abuse, and Zenobia Lehman, executive director of the Peoria House. Thank you both so much for being here today. I know that you guys have both dedicated your careers to helping people in these types of situations, and I really commend you because I know that, especially with the pandemic, these numbers have continued to rise. And, so I'm hoping that we can help, even if it's one person at the end of this, it would be amazing. So thank you both for being here. But before we, I guess, go into our real topic today, could you both just give us a little idea about what you do at Providence?
I'll start. I'm a family nurse practitioner and forensic nurse examiner. I work exclusively through our Intervention Center for Assault and Abuse, providing medical exams to sexual and physical abuse victims. We also have a team of nurses that respond to all 5 emergency rooms in Snohomish County to provide 24/7 coverage for victims who present with those concerns as well. And I'm also the founder of Peoria Home, and Zenobia is our new executive director, so I'll let her say a little bit about that.
Thank you. I'm Zenobia Lehman, executive director to Peoria Home. I will say that Peoria Home provides a wide range of services to individuals who have been impacted by sex trafficking and prostitution, and who have developed coping skills related to chemical dependency and substance abuse related mechanisms. We do offer educational GED programs, job skills programs. We do have a on-staff mental health provider to ensure that we are meeting individuals and addressing the trauma that they have experienced in their lives. And we have an array of other programs, including life skills and things associated with self-sufficiency and growing beyond what's impacted them.
So. That's incredible. And I apologize, it's Peoria Home, not House. But, both of you discussing what you do in your roles, this is a very sort of layered topic. It's and there's a lot of some people end up in it because of life situations and circumstances, and then there's ways that like you mentioned, Zenobia, in terms of coping. Can we just take it back just a teeny bit though to what can you tell us about the issue of domestic violence in general?
So domestic violence can happen to anybody in a relationship. There is no ethnic, sexual identity, race, or financial class that is exempt or immune from possibly experiencing domestic violence. And domestic violence comes in a lot of different ways. Most people think of it as primarily physical abuse, but domestic violence may involve mental abuse and emotional abuse and financial control as well as physical abuse. So it's not just somebody being battered, but it's also somebody being manipulated and controlled on a daily basis in a relationship.
Yeah, and I mean, actually, in my situation, there was physical abuse, but I think for me personally, the hardest to get over was the emotional abuse, because I felt like at first you don't realize what's really happening, and then once it happens, it starts to chip away so much at who you are that actually, when I was realizing that it's been 5 years, I realized how much, in a lot of ways, I sort of had to rebuild not only my life but myself, because you have so much taken away from you. You start to question every thought that you have, and you start hearing that voice in your head, and so it really does impact you mentally. And I appreciate you bringing up that it can happen to anybody. I mean, prior to me starting Her Feed, I had another business for women that helped women, and so I felt like if the last person that would ever happen to would be me, because I thought I had all the tools and the information. And again, you can't really happen to anybody. And so again, I hope that we can help somebody if they are feeling as helpless and hopeless in their situation. But I do know that the pandemic has likely impacted more people. People have been staying at home, and there's been a lot more stress. And so can you tell us about how the pandemic has made domestic violence worse in your community, or just overall?
I think one of the biggest ways that the pandemic has impacted domestic violence and sexual violence really is with people being able to access services. A lot of support services closed down or limited their exposure. People were afraid to go to the emergency room early on in the pandemic because the emergency rooms were overwhelmed and nobody wanted to be exposed to COVID in the ER. So people didn't reach out and seek services for quite a while. And the people that we were seeing in the emergency room had very significant injuries that really forced them to go in and seek care. So domestic violence victims with minor injuries weren't coming in for services. And so what we were seeing were pretty severe cases. Now, whether or not domestic violence has actually increased during the pandemic, we believe it has, but we really don't have hard data on that. But with people being isolated and unemployed and increased substance use, being quarantined together, just increases the stress and increases the likelihood of increased violence.
Can you share some of the signs that people can look for that may identify when a person has been a victim of domestic violence?
Sometimes it's really hard to identify that, but people who have injuries and how they tell you that injury happened doesn't really seem plausible or doesn't really fit what you're seeing. People who have been isolated, people who show up with a really controlling partner that won't let them answer questions or speak, or somebody who, anytime you get together with them, is watching their clock and they have to be home at a certain time and they cut things short because they're in a hurry to get home. Maybe something going on there that's controlling and maybe that's concerning. And people often want to know what they can do to help. And really providing somebody with the national hotline number or local hotline numbers are the best thing you can do. Trying to actually intervene in that relationship may increase their risk of being harmed. So providing them resources so that when they're ready to reach out for help, they know where to go.
Yeah, I think it's really important in terms of, again, I'll just speak to my own situation. I think a lot of people don't really understand it if they're not in it. And every situation is very different. And so I personally, I actually lost a few friends during it who may have sort of sided with my ex. And also, there's people that question why you don't just leave, and they don't understand the complexities behind it. And so I think it's really important that if you know someone who's in a situation like that, you don't give them ultimatums and put them possibly in harm's way, but you try to support them as best as you can. Because really, and even if you just read the news, we recently heard about, the young girl that was, murdered by her partner, or it's alleged that that's what happened. And so, that I think also too, a lot of people in those situations, they tend to cover up for their partner because they're scared to really, get them in trouble. And so I think that it is very, I think it's hard to be also someone on the outside looking at it as well, because you want to help, and we're so used to helping people we care about. And sometimes there aren't as many things that you can do to really help in that type of situation. As far as, are there like common things that you see in these situations?
Are you meaning like when patients come in or what we've seen recently?
Yeah. Are there telltales? Like, I know you mentioned, the partner being more controlling or whatever, but are there common injuries, or are there common, is it that they always show up with a black eye? Are there certain things that are sort of, alarming signs that, hey, could be happening?
I think one of the things is, yes, black eyes, any facial injuries. If you know this person fairly well and they're all of a sudden wearing a lot more makeup than they ever used to wear, what are they trying to hide under that makeup, to conceal? Being really nervous when they're out, constantly watching over their shoulder, checking their phone, making sure that they answer messages right away. Things like that are telltale signs of control and abuse.
You mentioned before about other types of abuse. Are there other signs that you can look at, maybe in terms of the financial abuse, or even emotional abuse?
I think the emotional and mental abuse is so much harder to really identify, but it certainly does a lot of damage to people. So, depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts or attempts, trying to get to what is causing those things in people. Those could all be related to abuse, and certainly something to look for.
What about what you sort of touched upon this, but what can people do if they suspect that someone has been a victim? Should they call the authorities? Is any advice there?
I think really reaching out to the person and asking them if they're safe or if there's anything that they want to talk about. Some states have mandatory reporting laws around domestic violence. Washington State does not. So it is not a mandatory report to law enforcement in this state. But, reaching out to the person, just asking them if they're in a safe relationship or if there's anything that you can help them with right then and there is probably the best and safest approach to take.
What about, you mentioned also before the sex trafficking and stuff like that. Are there any signs that someone could look out for in terms of someone who might be in that type of situation?
Well, sex trafficking actually has a lot of similarity to domestic violence, especially the relationship with the trafficker. Often they say it takes someone at least 7 attempts to leave a domestic violence relationship. And we see a lot of similarity in that in our trafficking victims. It takes them many attempts to try to leave that trafficker. And that's actually a very dangerous time, both for domestic violence victims and for trafficking victims when they're trying to leave. So it's important to have a safety plan in place and a plan about where you're going if you are trying to leave. So things with trafficking victims, again, control, financial control. Most trafficking victims don't have their own identity on them because traffickers typically take identification from victims. They may have very fancy clothing or bags or phones, and yet they will report to you that they are couch surfing or living on the streets. And so that could be a clue that that may be a trafficking victim as opposed to a domestic violence victim. But there are a lot of similarities between the relationships.
You actually mentioned about how many times it takes someone to leave, and I sort of mentioned it before. I was asked so many times, why didn't you leave sooner? Or, what took so long? And I have to say, as someone who was in that situation, I don't know that there is something that actually feels worse to be asked, because, it's not for lack of not wanting to leave. It's that you don't have the strength or you don't know how to leave. But I think if there's one thing that I would hope that people take away from this, it is sort of, if they're not in that situation, but in terms of supporting other people, is that I think that's a question that is probably not one I would ever recommend asking someone. But can you explain, in terms of domestic violence or, an abusive relationship, why does it take so long for someone to leave? And at what point is it usually that this person is able to leave?
I think one of the reasons why it takes so long to leave is because most domestic violence has a cycle. There's a tension building phase, and then there's an episode of abuse, and then there's the apologies, the promises to never do it again, the excuses, it was because I was intoxicated, or it was because I was angry about work. Those may explain the abuse, but they never excuse the abuse. But, when you care about somebody, when you think you're in love with somebody, you want to believe and trust them that they made a mistake and that they really won't do that again. And so I think it takes a long time for women to realize and recognize that cycle of abuse, because in between episodes, there may be months of calmness where the relationship seems pretty good and pretty normal. And then you may get gifts from your abuser, even an apology for what they've done, but that doesn't excuse what they've done.
Very true. And I think that sometimes even worse is that they blame you for what their reactions were. And I think that ends up that cycle. It's like you're just clawing to try to get back in their good graces again. And I think that also helps perpetuate this cycle. How do people who have been victims of domestic violence and assault recover from their trauma? I mean, I can say it took a lot of therapy on my end, and having my own goals and dreams and feeling like I deserved better. But I know that not everyone is in the same situation, and certainly the mindset, that I was in. So do you have anything that you can advise on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say one other thing about the other reason why people don't leave is there is a national shortage on shelter beds or safe places for women to go. And when it comes to recovery, one of the very first things people need leaving a domestic violence relationship or leaving trafficking is safe and stable shelter. And when you don't have any place to go, you don't go. So, and what helps beyond safe shelter is trauma therapy. And it takes a while to be able to build your self-esteem back up and reclaim who you are outside of the relationship.
Yeah, that's very true. You also mentioned sort of having a safe plan, and then Zenobia, I'm going to change some of my questions over to you. But in terms of what is a safe plan? Just because I don't know that a lot of people know what that really means.
So developing a safe plan may be talking to your domestic violence shelter wherever you are locally, and developing a way to stash away a little bit of money, determining exactly where you're going to go and how you're going to get there when you choose to leave, and trying to plan out the safest time to leave. So you need to think about all of those things ahead of time to make sure that your exit is as safe as it possibly can be.
Yeah, and I think, I moved across the country, so that was my way of, but it took a lot for me to get those ducks in a row to be able to do that. And I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't. So I every day I am very grateful that I was able to do that, but I know a lot of women that aren't. And so I think, again, I'm just so grateful that we're having this conversation, and incredibly grateful for places like Peoria Home that exist, because I know that you guys are doing so much good. Could you talk about Peoria Home and like the ongoing treatment and support that it offers?
Absolutely. Peoria Home has an on-staff consulting mental health provider. A lot of times in Snohomish County, when an individual has left either trafficking or prostitution or even domestic violence, establishing benefits or even Medicaid services that would help cover, behavioral health services may take some time. And so we make sure that we have an individual counselor on staff that can work with them immediately and bridge the gap between the basic need of getting the coverage that they need to be able to get the services that they need, because they'll be long-term and ongoing. And so the immediate response that the Peoria Home has is an on-staff counselor, right? Some of the other things that we offer is case management. We have an intensive case management program here to ensure that basic needs are met right away. A lot of times when people come into the program, they may not even have clothes. They may have just left with what they had on them physically. And so intensive case management makes sure that we are covering basic needs. They have food, they have clothing, and they have a safe place to spend the night, and feel safe. Outside of that, Peoria Home also ensures that proper referrals are made, that referrals for assessments. A lot of times assessments are made for behavioral health and also, substance abuse disorders, to ensure that we're looking holistically at the individual and making sure that they get the services required to help them heal from the trauma they've experienced.
That's incredible, because it's not, I think that's also really important, because it isn't just like, okay, you leave. There's things that need to happen to help you, I think, be able to move forward from it, especially to sort of ensure that you're not going to go back to it. But it can be very overwhelming, because it's not just a magic fix. But putting in the work and having the resources there is so worth it, because, again, like we've said numerous times, no one deserves to be in a situation like that. But I know that Peoria Home does a lot of work within the community. So can you talk about that as well?
Yes, absolutely. We actually are part of the Snohomish County Human Trafficking Task Force, and we also partner with other community-based organizations to develop a referral system, such as organizations such as Cocoon House and YWCA and other organizations that are either working in domestic violence or working in trafficking in some capacity, so that we can create those referral systems that work. We are also part of a network with Thistle Farms, which is a multitude of residential service providers nationwide that may have availability in beds. So if our residential program is full, we have the capacity to also refer to that network of providers that may have beds available. And so we may be a smaller program, but we have capacity to really help in our community. And we really do that through a collective impact model in working with other community-based organizations. And of course, being a member of the task force and having a voice and understanding that it is a huge component to doing this work, advocating for survivors and ensuring that we are meeting their needs.
And so then how does who does the Peoria Home residential program, who does it serve?
So Peoria Home serves women who are escaping sex trafficking, prostitution, and who have been subject to, substance abuse disorders and chemical dependency as a result of the sex trafficking and prostitution that they've experienced. However, I can tell you that 98% of the women in our program have been impacted by domestic violence, and many times they seek assistance from domestic violence shelters, where it's recognized that they are escaping sex trafficking, and then that they are referred to our program from there. So we really have a partnership with domestic violence programs, because a lot of times that's the first outlet that our women might seek.
And what is the program like once they get there? What would somebody expect?
We have a beautiful program at Peoria Home. The very first thing that they can expect is some space and time to heal. A lot of times when a new client comes into the program, they are met with a nice warm bed, a welcome basket. We usually put together even a small basket of food items that they may enjoy, and we give them some time just to relax and become comfortable, and before we even engage in the immediate intake process. And so we just give them a little moment to heal and breathe. Once they get into the program, it is self-led and trauma-informed. And so the women have an opportunity to partake in a million different things that are going on in our community through referral processes in the case management part of their program. But it is really providing opportunities, and they make the decisions on where they want to go and what they want to do. And so that may be completing their GED, that may be going to college, that may be taking care of their health. And a lot of times women who have escaped this type of trauma and abuse are really impacted physically. And so it's something to be expected when individuals come into the program. So
that's incredible. And I think one of the things that sounds so amazing about it is that these women are being given a little bit more control over their lives. And I think that is huge when you've had that taken away from you. I think, and having the time to feel, or the place and the time to feel safe and to try to heal and to make choices that you may not have been able to make previously. We have almost run out of time though, which is crazy because I feel like we just started talking. So is there anything that either of you want to add about the Peoria Home, or anything that you want to add in terms of raising awareness for domestic violence?
I think one thing I'd like to add about Peoria Home is that the women don't live in like an institution. They live in a home, and there's no live-in on-site staff. So they take care of each other during the off hours. And it is just a regular house in a neighborhood. As far as domestic violence goes, if you are experiencing domestic violence, where there are crisis lines available, the numbers are going across your screen, please reach out and at least talk to somebody and start that safety planning process. We are here to help you the best that we can. And if you have been physically abused and need injuries documented, you can go to any of the 5 emergency rooms in Snohomish County, and our forensic nursing team with a nurse and an advocate will come and see you and evaluate your injuries and document your history.
That's incredible. Anything you want to add, Zenobia, at all?
I think that when individuals are working in domestic violence, that they just be cognizant of the fact that a lot of times domestic violence is that maybe an entryway to some further understanding of really, where they are coming from. And it may be from sex trafficking or prostitution, or it may have even been an element of the relationship they have with the individual that they're fleeing from. And just to look for, those community support systems that have kind of diminished for that individual as well, because that is a key finding in women who've been impacted by domestic violence.
Absolutely. So thank you both so much for having this conversation with me today, and to everyone for listening. To learn more about our initiatives, programs, services, and ways to give, or if you're looking for medical care, please visit providence.org, and make sure to follow us at Providence Health System for LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, and under Providence on Twitter. And you can follow me at the Her Feed on Instagram. But I hope everyone watching, if you're in a situation, that there are resources and there is a way out. And write down those phone numbers, and people want to help you, and you're not alone. And so I just hope that we can provide some hope for anyone who may be feeling like hope is gone right now. But to everybody else for watching, thank you, and we will see you soon. Bye.
Bye.